Laura, Paul, John, and Luke Yates are being buried today, along with their 6-month-old sister Mary. Their bodies were found a week ago, drowned, police say, by their own mother. The funeral service at the church has ended just moments ago, and CNN's Ed Lavandera is there to bring us up to date on this somber story today. Ed?
Lou, perhaps the natural order of life tells us that parents aren't supposed to bury their children. It's supposed to be the other way around. And unfortunately for Russell Yates, that is the sad story that he has to live today. As you said just moments ago, the funeral service here for his 5 children ended. The motorcade pulling out. Perhaps you can hear the sirens leaving as we speak. There's one little moment kind of going on I thought kind of captured the entire situation here. As the funeral procession was pulling out of the church, they stopped traffic, and a woman who was second in line there in the car and had no idea that she was driving past this church when this happened, rolled down her windows, and you could see her crying, and she was just driving by. Inside the church today, Russell Yates arrived about 2 hours ago to speak and eulogized his children inside. He spoke to each one of them individually. There were collages of pictures of each of the children, and later on in the eulogy, it was time to close the caskets, and with the help of some other folks inside the sanctuary, perhaps the most poignant and emotional moment of the entire service, when he went down by each casket and closed it for the final time. The family is now on its way to the cemetery where the children will be laid to rest. And earlier today, the minister of this church, the Clear Lake Church of Christ, spoke about just what kind of message he'd be delivering here today.
That tragedy is an understatement. I don't believe there are words in any language that can describe what has happened. The only way that Mr. Yates or anybody else can deal with this adequately is going to come from the strength that the Lord provides. Mr. Yates has lost all of his children, and in essence, he's lost his wife at this time. He is in desperate need, and yet he is clinging to the Lord as his rock and as his security at this time, and so he's finding support from him.
After Mr. Yates finished talking about each of his children, he also read from Bible passages, presenting them to the congregation, about 500 people that packed into this church this morning. It almost seemed like he was trying to comfort them and offer them an explanation for what happened. Each person who attended today's funeral service was given this program, In Loving Memory is the headline, with pictures of each of the kids, and in back it says the children are survived by their parents, Russell and Andrea Yates. So the Yates family making an effort today to bring Andrea's name into the service, at least through this way. Lou?
All right, Ed Lavandera in Houston. Natalie?
A case in Hawaii had chilling similarities to the deaths of the children there in Houston. 36 years ago, 5 children were drowned in the bathtub and their mother was charged. Cheryl Turbeville of our affiliate KHON in Honolulu tells us what happened.
Residents of Wana'ea neighborhood remember a hauntingly similar case, but it happened on November 22nd, 1965.
Well, I flashed back to this incident back in the 60s, and all I could remember was, how could another thing like this has happened the same way?
This Aiea home turned into a crime scene when 38-year-old Margaret Young drowned her 5 children in a bathtub. She killed her 4 daughters, ages 7 months to 5 years, and then laid their bodies on a bed. She then walked to Elva Scott Elementary, just minutes away, to pick up her 8-year-old son, Frankie. Within minutes of getting home, she would also drown him in the bathtub and place his body on another bed in the same room. Ted Carroll Jr. remembers losing his young playmate.
It was a shock. I couldn't think, how could it happen? You have a friend and all of a sudden he's not there and he's gone.
Carroll was just 12 at the time and had just returned home from school when he learned his next-door neighbor and friend was dead. According to newspaper reports, shortly before the tragic murders, Margaret Young had been treated at Tripler Hospital after suffering a nervous breakdown. She had implied that a tragedy may occur because she could not deal with the care of her children.
The only thing I remember about her was that she was a very quiet person. She kept to herself.
Margaret Young was the wife of Air Force Captain James Young. They had been stationed in Hawaii for about 1 year when she murdered her children. Margaret Young was charged with first-degree premeditated murder, but was later committed to the state hospital. 8 months later, she was found dead. She had hung herself in the chicken slaughterhouse on hospital grounds.
According to published reports, Ms. Young had told family members prior to the killings that she was not a good enough mother.
Cases of parents being accused of killing their children are not all that uncommon. These stories happen literally every day. Today alone, for example, an Illinois mother pleaded not guilty to beating her infant daughter to death. In Atlanta, a man is charged with aggravated battery in the death of his 13-month-old daughter. And in North Carolina, investigators are trying to determine if a mother killed her 3 daughters and herself. Joining us now from Chicago is Dr. Helen Morrison, a forensic psychiatrist who's usually with us at times of tragedy like this to help us understand the story. Before you begin, Doctor, I'd like to, from the Society for the Prevention of Infanticide, quote, the U.S. ranks high on the list of countries whose inhabitants kill their children. Between 1968 and 75, 3.2% of all homicides were parents killing children. Between 82 and 87, 600 children killed by their parents, an increase in that type of crime while homicides were going down. What is it all about?
Infanticide has been known since before recorded time. And what it's about, it really depends on the motive. Infanticide has a lot of motives. A lot of parents kill their children. In some cultures, it's institutionalized. If you're born a girl, the risk of you being killed is much higher than if you're a boy. We've had so many cases in the United States of parents who have killed their children because the parents have needs and they're interfered with by these children. I believe the Susan Smith case is a perfect example of that. And then we have the cases of the parents who become out of contact with reality. They develop a severe mental illness. They may hear voices that tell them to hurt their children, or they may have a belief that it's false, that the deaths of their children will be better off than if they were alive. And what we're seeing now, obviously, is a lot of media attention, but this is definitely not a new problem.
Now, in the case of Andrea Yates, that certainly is different from a Susan Smith case, is it not?
Absolutely. There's a difference between a personality who needs something for themselves and an individual who appears to have a severe mental illness that they are not controlling and that doesn't help them understand what they're doing as well as appreciate the rightfulness or wrongfulness of their act.
And we understand also from the same society that I quoted that usually infanticide is a crime committed by mothers.
Yes, well, mothers are primary caretakers. Mothers are the ones, believe it or not, who are faced with the burdens of not only the new child, the changes in themselves physically and hormonally, the burdens of the family, and the burdens of adjusting. It's a tremendous stress for anyone to bring a new infant into a family, but the stress seems to be higher for the maternal figure.
Now, for all the reasons you mentioned for parents killing their children, there really isn't any definable prevention for any of those crimes. But in the case of Andrea Yates and other mothers who may be suffering postpartum depression or psychosis, there must be some mechanism for either spotting or being able to predict what might be possible.
One of the difficulties is the lack of education that many generalists have or many internists have. Some OB-GYN, obstetrician gynecologists, are more acquainted with depression. Many women have depression several days after delivery, but we're talking about a depression that occurs later, within the first 6 months, in which the mother starts to show withdrawal, starts to show unusual behaviors, but generally she's not taken to a doctor. Generally there isn't anyone in the family who says this is a little out of line. So it's a matter of educating people as well as physicians as to what signs to look for.
Thank you once again, Dr. Helen Morrison, forensic psychiatrist from Chicago, once again today. Natalie, what's next?
Thank you.
Other news now, former federal judge and FBI Chief William Sessions says the goal of capital punishment should be justice, not executions. To that end, Sessions and other prominent members of a bipartisan panel have spent the past year coming up with 18 recommendations for making the death penalty more fair. They include effective counsel for all capital defendants, exempting defendants who are younger than 18 and those who are mentally handicapped, making life without parole an optional sentence in all capital cases, and safeguarding against racial bias in every step of the process. The group's report coincides with the Senate hearing on ensuring competent counsel in death penalty cases. Most Americans support capital punishment and have for generations, but by an overwhelming margin, most Americans also think an innocent person has been put to death in the past 5 years. Frank Newport joins us now from the Gallup studio in Princeton, New Jersey with some fascinating data today. Frank?
Indeed, Natalie. I think a lot of Americans might agree with some of those recommendations you just showed us, but the bottom line is the American public convincingly still says they want the death penalty. The first two things I want to show you kind of summarize it very basically. A question we just asked, is the death penalty used too often, about right, or not enough? Today in America, number one response we get from the public, look over here, is about 4 out of 10 said it's not used often enough today. They actually want the death penalty used more often. And that's despite the fact that in several different polls we've conducted over the last several years, as I'll show you, as you mentioned, when we say, is it possible that an innocent person has been executed? 80% of Americans in one poll told us indeed they felt that was possible, yet in the same poll we had 2/3 supporting the death penalty. Here's that trend you mentioned. It goes all the way back to prior to World War II. 59% of Americans in 1936, one of Gallup's first questions actually, supported the death penalty. It went down, it's come back up, it's down a little, but still, we're right at that 2/3 number. We'll remind you the reason why Americans support the death penalty is not deterrence, which is what President Bush mentions a lot, but number one reason, over half of those who support it say it's because of justice, an eye for an eye, kind of a biblical injunction. Finally, one of those recommendations you put up there said expand use of life in prison without parole. When we give that as an explicit alternative to the death penalty to Americans in a question, support comes down, but even with that as an explicit...
Al Sharpton has been leading the charge.